Chapter 2 of The Flu. A Brief History of Influenza in U.S. America, Europe, Hawaii by A. Moritz. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Grace Buchanan. Chapter 2. Influenza Epidemics in U.S. America. A.D. 1557 appeared in America, spread from Constantinople. Very fatal. 1580, Pandemic 2, spread to America. 1647, for the first time mentioned in the history of America, swept the plantations in the South. 1732-33, Pandemic 3, October 1732 appeared in Connecticut. Following day in Massachusetts. Annapolis 2 days later attacked 50% of the garrison. 1761 appeared in the spring, northern parts of the USA, Philadelphia, Massachusetts, and Weymouth. 1767 appeared in the month of May. 1775-76 epidemic in the USA. 1781-82 Pandemic 4, very severe, widespread, appearing in the spring, began in the east, China, thence to India, Russia, Western Europe, named the Russian Catarrh, appeared in USA in April 1782. 1788-89 prevailed extensively in USA, from the 15th to the 45th degree of latitude, spread over this area in 6 to 8 weeks. 1807, generally disseminated throughout the USA. 1815 ditto, 1824 ditto, 1825 ditto, 1826 ditto, 1830, Pandemic 6. November 1831 reached America. Seat of the outbreak, Manila, PI, in September 1830. 1843, very prevalent in New England in the month of June. 1850-51, epidemic in the USA. 1873, prevalent in the states of Pennsylvania, Ohio, Virginia, Illinois, Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Missouri, Alabama, Louisiana, Texas. 1874-75 reoccurred in all the above states. 1879 epidemic in the USA. 1889-90 Pandemic 9 began in May 1889 at Bukhara, Russian Turkestan. One of the worst pandemics ever known, ran over the whole globe in a few months. America infected from both Siberia and Europe. Appeared in New York end of October 1889. San Francisco infected from Japan, December 1889. 1918-19, Pandemic 10, began in southwestern Spain in April 1918, spread to the USA in May 1918. Wide morbidity. Prevalent all over the states. Pneumonia very severe and fatal, especially in the training camps where it swept off numbers of the flower of the American youth. To date, number of epidemics in the USA, 17. To date, number of pandemics in the USA, 5. Influenza epidemics in Europe and Asia. B.C. 1103, epidemic in Babylon or Babyrus of the Persians. 722, epidemic in Nineveh during the reign of Sargon, king of Assyria. 591, Diodorus mentions a pestilence as having occurred at this date, accompanied with headache, coma, and death. Meningitis, A.M. 412. The Roman historian and writer Livy refers to a pestilence resembling the flu in Book 4, page 52. 395. A pestilence claimed to be flu destroyed by thousands the soldiers in the Greek army at the siege of Syracuse. Plague or cholera, A.M. A.D. 827. A cough disease with fever spread rapidly and widely, known as haft or haffadflowen, also as sewolf. Epidemic in Britain. 876. A disease attended with cough and fever, pain in the eyes. Italiae febris, Italian fever, ravaged Germany and Italy. 888. A disease with cough and fever spread through Germany. 927. A disease with cough and fever, epidemic in France and Germany. 996-7. A disease with cough and fever, epidemic in England. 1173. First epidemic, or claimed to be the first, prevailed in Italy, Germany, and England. 1323. The same countries invaded, spread to persons, towns, and villages. 1327. The same countries invaded, spread to persons, towns, and villages. 1387. Jakob von Königshofen states in the Strasbourg Chronicle, a general pestilence invaded the whole country, attended with cough and fever. Hardly 1 among 10 were unaffected. 1403-4. Epidemic over Europe. 1411. Epidemic. Name given to the disease, l'attaque. Cause, contagion in the air, extensively. Caused abortions. During convalescence, there was profuse hemorrhages from the mouth, nose, and bowels. This account of the disease is given by Besky of Paris, 1665. 1414. Epidemic in France in February and March. Names given to the disease, l'attaque, l'Orient, and coqueluche. Authority, Lavino. 1427. Epidemic, widespread in France and the continent of Europe. Name given to the disease, ladendo. Symptoms, cough, insomnia, renal pains, anorexia, rigors constantly. The greeting everywhere on meeting friends was, "Have you had ladendo?" 1510. Pandemic 1. All over Europe. First accurate description given of its prevalence in the British Isles. Mild in type. Names given in France, cephale-catarrhal and coqueluche. In Britain, coqueluche. Authority, T. Thompson. 1557. Came from Constantinople. Very fatal. Spread to the USA. Ravaged Paris in July and August. Spain in August. England in September. Holland in October. Distinctive symptoms. Quote, tightness and dreadful oppression over the chest as if bound with red-hot chains. The same sensations over the abdomen and stomach. End quote. Authorities, Thompson, Herman. 1562, mild epidemic. 1563, mild epidemic. 1580, pandemic 2. Started on the north coast of Africa in Algiers and Morocco in May, also in the island of Malta. Spread to the USA. Authority, Fonseca of Madrid. England ravaged, August, September, October, November. Rome, 9,000 persons died. Barcelona, Cadiz, Cordova, Seville, Madrid, and other Spanish cities are said to have been depopulated. The Spanish physicians bled their patients. This venesection is said to have been very fatal. Those who were not bled, most lived. Thomas Short, London, 1587, states on page 9, all had the coqueluche. Few died except those who were bled or had unsound viscera. Anna, wife of Philip I of Spain, died of the disease. Pope Gregory XIII was given up for death, but recovered. Epidemics in 1591, 1593, 1597, 1626. 1647, Noah Webster states, "For the first time, influenza is mentioned in the history of U.S. America, but it must not be concluded in the absence of earlier records that the disease never occurred in the USA." Webster also cites from Hubbard, "The disease swept the southern states and the plantations. The West Indies were ravaged and had an extensive morbidity. On each of the islands of Barbados and St. Kitts, there were 5,000 to 6,000 cases." 1658, epidemic in Europe, started the end of April. Thomas Wills, MD of Oxford, says, quote, "The cause of the disease was a blast from the stars," end quote. 1675, epidemic, ravaged Germany. 1688, epidemic, began in May, Europe swept, great mortality in Britain. 1693, epidemic, Europe. 1709, epidemic in Europe, France, Germany, and Italy chiefly affected. 1712, Europe, epidemic began in Germany. Fever, cough, sense of dread and oppression, painful eyes and great backache. Rapid spread, great and prolonged exhaustion. Morbidity great, nearly everyone attacked. Mortality very light. 1729 to 30. Origin, Moscow, Russia, April 1729. Morbidity enormous, lightning-like spread. In London, great mortality, barely 1% escaped. In the month of September 1729, over 1,000 persons died each week. Rome had some 60,000 cases. Authority, Han. 1732 to 3, pandemic 3, raged over the entire earth, spread to U.S. America, October 1732. 1742 to 3, La Grippe and influenza appear as names given to the disease for the first time. Epidemic, great morbidity, few deaths. 1758, the flu prevailed as an epidemic in France, Scotland, and the West Indies. 1761, present in the USA in the spring. 1762, epidemic in Europe. 1767, U.S. America began in month of May. 1775 to 6, spread from Europe to USA. Authority, Gluge. 1780 to 1, January 1780, started in France. 1781 to 2, pandemic 4, very severe, widespread, began in the autumn of 1781 on the borders of China and India, thence spread to Russia and USA. In 1782 appeared in Western Europe. The name given in this pandemic was Russian catarrh. The British fleet sailed from the Channel ports Plymouth and Portsmouth on May 6, 1782. No further contact was had with the land, yet on the 27th of May, the flu broke out on the fleet. The presence of flu carriers on the ships or infected stores closed and other fomites and only opened after a week or two at sea, also the flu being epidemic at the ports of departure, will amply account for this alleged miracle. Author. 1788-9, widespread epidemic in the USA. Statement of Webster, quote, influenza is not spread by infection. Sailors on board ships 100 miles from land and insulated as to infection were attacked. End quote. Influenza is spread by infection. The explanation and defense is the same as just made above. Author. 1799 to 1800, Northeastern Europe, epidemic. 1802-3, pandemic 5. 1807, pandemic 6. 1830, pandemic 7. The seat of the outbreak was Manila, PI in September. It spread to the USA. 1833, epidemic in Northern Asia, Europe, North Africa. In St. Petersburg, great morbidity. None escaped. 1836-7, pandemic 8. Starting point obscure, but in the Eastern Hemisphere. Morbidity and mortality large. Pulmonary influenza or influenza pneumonia cases very common. In London, for the week ending January 24, 1837, there died 1,166 persons, and for the week ending January 31, the death rate reached a total of 1,169. These deaths were solely due to flu. 1847-8, pandemic 9. Point of origin unknown. Center of the focus of the disease, the Eastern Hemisphere, and Europe especially. More females than males were attacked. Great mortality. Of those affected with the disease, there died 83% of children, babies, and infants. 104% of those 15 to 60 years. 247% of those over 60 years. Authority, Peacock. In Paris, 1/4 to 1/2 of the population were attacked. In Geneva, 1/3 of the population were attacked. In London, 250,000 were said to have been stricken. U.S. America escaped the disease. 1850-1, 1857-8, 1873-4, 1875, 1879, influenza prevalent in both hemispheres. 1889-90, pandemic 10. Started at Bukhara in Russian Turkestan, large province situated to the east of the Caspian Sea, March 1889. Very vicious in its morbidity and spread, acted as never before. Ran over the whole globe in a few months. Contagious, which hitherto in doubt was clearly demonstrated by this epidemic, which spread from Asia to Russia. America was infected from both Siberia and Europe. Tropical and temperate countries, mountain and plain, were all swept over alike. 1918-9 to 1920, Pandemic 11. Origin in southeastern Spain, Barcelona, a seaport. April 1918, where a German submarine is said to have carried it. Originally acquired by this boat at the Baltic port or ports of Danzig or Stettin. Swept Europe and entered Asiatic Russia, later Japan. U.S. America was infected at its Pacific and Atlantic ports. The conditions of trade and commerce during the World War were unusually favorable for the carrying of influenza to the USA. America, the great-souled, as always, acting most generously, putting herself on short rations in order to feed the starving millions of the world, and sending her ships with food and clothing to the flu-infected ports, carried back the disease to her own people. To date, number of epidemics in Europe, 47. To date, number of pandemics in Europe, 11. Names for influenza: Italian, catarro russo and influente. Portuguese, catarro epidemico. Spanish, catarro epidemico. German, Blitzkatar equals lightning catarrh. German, influenz. End of Chapter 2. Recording by Grace Buchanan.